Welcome to the Tech Story, a podcast about all things tech, business. We interview successful founders of fast-growing tech companies, and today I'm very excited to welcome Meryem Arik on the show, who is the co-founder of Titan, a very exciting compression platform startup for compressing NLP and deep learning models. Meryem, thank you for taking the time for being with us today. Can you please share a bit of background about yourself and the company?
Sure. Hey, Charles. So my background is by training, I'm a physicist, actually physicist and philosopher. I did a joint degree. And when I graduated, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I got a job, a corporate job in a bank. But what I realized while doing that is what I actually enjoyed is building things that I could see the impact on year after year after year. And the work I was doing in the bank was quite deal flow related. So the perfect place for me to do that and have that value was in a startup. So I moved into a startup and I really loved it. I think that's when I realized the joy involved with creating things that people love. And that's why I've been in the startup space. But what we're trying to do at Titan specifically is NLP models, so the kinds of things like ChatGPT and any AI models that use language or text, they're incredibly computationally expensive. So that means they're slow to run, they need very expensive computers to run, and they're very difficult to get into production. So what we, alongside my very smart technical co-founders, working on is ways to compress these NLP models to make them much smaller, less computationally expensive, so they can be run on cheaper hardware, much faster, and much easier to get into production. And that's what we're building now.
That's exciting. And obviously, everyone's talking about ChatGPT right now. I obviously have seen all your posts commenting about it. Do you feel like the mass adoption of ChatGPT is helping you? What are your thoughts on the whole situation?
It's fantastic for getting awareness of these kinds of models. So when we were first fundraising only about 6 months ago, we had VCs asking us if any businesses would even use AI or language AI in business. And ChatGPT has kind of blown those questions out of the water. It's so obvious how beneficial these language models can be in almost everything that we can do in almost every single industry. So it's been really helpful from that point of view. The flip side is ChatGPT is kind of like using a sledgehammer to crack open a walnut for a lot of use cases. So we see a lot of businesses building on top of ChatGPT and spending a lot of money and getting very slow and sometimes poor performance for tasks that really don't need that kind of very, very high-powered model. And that's kind of the re-education work that we're doing at the moment. So like educating our users about what they actually need to be doing with their models to get the most performance for what they're paying.
And in terms of your users, do they have their own models? Are they using ChatGPT? Where do you sort of, or what is the minimum set of requirements that your users need to be able to use Titan?
So typically they'll be using open source models. So Hugging Face is a fantastic open source platform which hosts, loads of open source models created by researchers at Meta and Google and Microsoft and all of those. And typically the way that you'll build an NLP application is you'll take an open source model like that. You'll collect a bit of fine-tuning data. So let me give an example. Let's say you are a financial services company and you want to create a bot that will automatically read all of the tweets in the world and tell you whether they're positive or negative about a particular company that you're interested in. Let's say I'm buying Apple stocks and I want to see if they're tweeting positively about Apple or negatively. Then what I might do is create a bit of fine-tuning data of examples of tweets and then label them as positive or negative. And that's my fine-tuning data. And then I can take that data and train it on top of my open source model. And that's kind of where we come in. So given that you have a bit of fine-tuning data and you're looking at building models yourself, then we can be really helpful in getting them into production.
And so you then take that model, put it in Titan, and then it's super lightweight, super fast.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, yeah. So a nice way to think about these foundation models that we start with is kind of like a big block of marble. Like they're a starting point. So my foundation model, like ChatGPT, for example, is able to write love letters and also write code. But actually, as a user, I never needed to do all of that. So what we do is we go in and we cut out the bits of the model that aren't relevant for whatever task your fine-tuning data wants to use it for. Kind of like cutting, the David out of the block of marble.
Exciting.
Yeah,
That sounds
cool.
really a really nice way to frame it, because obviously it's always useful to have a Swiss Army knife, but the reality is maybe you should just take that one knife or one tool that you need. So that's great. And obviously you've co-founded this business. What lessons have you learned so far?
That's well, we made a lot of mistakes, like I'm sure every single founder does. I think the biggest learning curve, or the first learning curve we came across, was figuring out how to fundraise. It's a bit of a strange skill that you have to acquire, and it's all about storytelling. So can you take people along the journey to believe what you believe and hold so dear? And that was something that we took a long time, like to be able to iterate and find that story that really explains why we're passionate about what we're doing. So that's probably the biggest kind of lesson, is figuring out how to get across your passion.
Yeah, I think fundraising is a skill which I definitely haven't mastered or acquired.
It's not an easy skill, but you guys did a great round, so you must be somewhere there.
Yeah, I feel like it definitely wasn't we were very lucky to have the round, and it was a great round, but it definitely wasn't a walk through the park, and but I think you're right. The story is really key, and sometimes actually that story you need to refine it based on the investors you're speaking with, because they also help you understand the problem from is this actually an investable business?
Yeah.
And sometimes your story might be the right story, but there just needs to be some refining around, well,
Yeah.
will it make money for the investors or not?
And typically, especially good investors, know what they're talking about, and quite often normally come with very good advice. So I know a lot of founders hear the kind of feedback or no's from investors as like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, or they've missed a big opportunity. We got a huge amount of value by really absorbing that feedback and then looking very critically at our business, because quite often these are people that are very experienced and really know what a good business looks like. So there's a lot of learning and iteration cycle, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with taking advice from
Absolutely, and
investors.
even if it's bad advice or wrong advice, it's still advice, and you need to.
And it might be that it's bad advice because you've not explained yourself properly. I mean, at the end of the day, it's almost always my fault in some way, whether they actually have a really good point and I need to address that, or I don't agree with their point, in which case I haven't done a good enough job at explaining why I think what I've done is right. So
my old boss always said that the burden of communication is always on the communicator.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't understand,
it's your fault. Yeah.
But great, and obviously learned a lot, and everyone makes mistakes. What's been your favorite moment so far?
When we gave our product to a user for the first time, we spent a long time building up the algorithms and building up the product in stealth. And we were working with design partners to ensure it was right. But it was kind of like we hadn't actually got it into an unbiased user's hands yet. And when we first did that about a month ago, and we got both good and bad feedback, like things that we can improve, but also validated a lot of things. But it was just super lovely and satisfying to know that it's actually coming real. People are using it. They think it'll actually help solve their problems. And and there's still obviously, we can still obviously make it better, but that was just a really, really nice moment.
No, it's great, and I think whenever the first person uses your product, it's always an exciting moment, and also you never know really how they're going to use it or what they're going to use it for, because everyone, well, especially at the beginning, you don't have the full understanding of all the use cases, and I guess based on the traction you've had so far, what are the key use cases? Obviously, language models are quite broad, so
They're kind of everywhere.
So what specific use cases are people using you for?
So we are a way of augmenting your ML engineers, and specifically in NLP. So the industries that are using a huge amount of NLP is finance, insurance, and legal, which is where you sit. And these are three industries where you see a huge amount of text, a huge amount of text and voice as well. For example, in legal, like if you think about the number of contracts that you have to try and look after, which is clearly the use case you guys are looking at. So those three industries, finance, insurance, and legal, are really nice sweet spots for us.
Great. Well, hopefully you don't take over what we do.
Oh, no. If anything, we would make you guys more powerful.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I know that behind the scenes there are various conversations or POCs happening, but no, it's all really exciting. And I guess, you're growing the company. You've just done a funding round. Congrats.
Thank you. Congrats to you.
Yeah. What does the big picture vision look like? Where do you want to see the company in 3-5 years time?
Yeah. So we want to supercharge every single NLP developer. And the way that we measure success is the number of models that are in production that have used our technology or been through our step of the chain. I want every single NLP engineer, especially in the enterprise, to have the Titan step as a key part of their workflow. So they get their model, they get their data set, that's one step, then they go through Titan, then straight into deployment. So that's what I want to see. So for me, the measure of success is the percentage of models in the world that's come through our pipeline.
And I guess you're at 10% right now?
Yeah, at least. Yeah. At least.
Perfect. Well, that's ambitious goal, and congrats. I guess as a co-founder, just getting started, imagine you must have come across some contracts or legal documents. What can you sort of share about them, and are there any tips for the next up and coming founders that are sort of listening today?
Yeah, I am not fluent in legalese at all. So we've come across a lot of contracts, and the first thing I do is ask advice from someone that knows what they're looking at. I make guesses and I can read the plain English and I do my best, but fundamentally I know there's a lot of things that can be hidden in these things. So get advice from people that know what they're doing with contracts, I think is a really important thing. And what I love to see in contracts is when they're written in plain English and are as concise as possible. Because actually, for most things, you don't need pages and pages and pages. You can do 1 or 2 pages. But yeah, that was definitely a learning curve.
Yeah, no, I think seeking advice is always important. And I think even if something is written in plain English, in the context of a contract, it can mean something completely different than what you expect. So I always find myself getting caught out, and I always try to seek legal advice when I can.
Yeah.
But I guess something that we try to do with Legislate is translate the contract into questions and answers which are easy to understand, but also do what they say, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that way, if you receive a contract and Legislate, you don't need to worry too much about, well, what will happen, or what does this actually mean, because it's explained to you in the form of questions and answers.
Oh,
and that's all you
So is that if
need to
you
understand.
both receive it as well as generate it?
Yes.
Oh, that's amazing.
So we always present both views to the users, and I guess there's a lot more that we could do to make it more explainable. Even, for example, what we're working on now is having more deeper semantic models of what's in the contract, so that if confidential information is defined, then you could say, well, what counts as confidential? Like, is X, let's say, is a trade secret confidential information? And it would say yes because it's
Oh,
defined, or
that's really cool.
yes, it falls under this. So, but it's all about how do we make those contracts like easier to digest, easier to query. Right now, we've done it just in the form of questions and answers, but we're now going deeper.
Step further.
Yeah.
No, that's amazing that it's on both sides. Because I always, when I'm generating contracts, the questions answers are super useful. But also receiving it, that's a really nice bit of
And from an
product
engineering
marketing.
perspective, it also makes it easier.
It does it. Well, that's really handy. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah. So
You should always keep things as simple as possible, but no simpler, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, you smashed it.
no, well, we're trying, and I guess I know you've obviously been building Titan for not too long, but and obviously there's the great piece of advice about seeking advice and making sure that the contracts are in plain English. Have you sort of found any challenges with contracts that you've sort of been really frustrated with and would love to sort of
Ooh.
solve?
Great. I mean, when we were doing fundraising, it's hard as a founder to know what is market standard and what isn't without seeking advice. So for us, you'd get a term, and as a first time founder, this is the first or second or third, fourth term sheet I've ever looked at. Like, I don't know if this particular clause is standard, if I can push back against that. And the only reason I got that information was through seeking advice. So I would say like that was a key area where we were like not really sure about what's kind of off market / on market. Similarly with like employment contracts, like non-competes, like we don't know how off market it is to have those anymore. So I guess there's a sense of what's normal to see in a contract is something that you get from experience, which we're still kind of developing. So seeking advice in all of those relevant areas was super important.
Yeah, no, I think if you always start with standard and market standard, then at the end of the day there's minimal negotiation.
Exactly.
But I do find that if you don't know, then you end up with something which is completely off, and then that's when the negotiation starts, and that's when the delays happen. And obviously with Legislate, we are building, well, we're aggregating data, and we are presenting that back to users so that they know what standard is in a
That's really valuable.
obviously anonymized way. But I think knowing what standard is something that a lot of people with experience or businesses with experience take for granted.
Yeah, like we're currently working with our lawyer on creating our kind of standard SaaS agreement. And the conversation we've been having with her is just make everything as standard and unobjectionable as possible, because I don't want to have to go through a negotiation every single time we sign a lease. But it's really awesome.
Yeah, great. And if you were to receive a contract to sign, what would impress you?
Clarity of both structure and thought within the contract. I've seen so many contracts that I've looked at and I'm like, this could have been a page. Like, what you're actually discussing is very, very narrow. So I think that's the key one for me. Yeah.
Yeah, one of our investors is a lawyer, and any contract that he generates is literally a page.
Yeah.
Obviously, you can achieve that with formatting, but also just
just have it on like size 1 font.
No. I mean, more like having columns, but you can obviously, if you're concise and to the point, then that sort of achieves that.
But it's not like we're negotiating M&A deals here.
No,
like, you really don't need anything super, super complex. So.
Yeah, no, exactly. And one thing we've also found through the podcast and interviewing founders is they all have interesting hobbies. I know you used to play rugby.
I did used to play rugby.
professionally or
Semi,
semi?
semi-professionally, yeah.
Are there any sort of lessons or anything that you've learned from rugby that you're like applying in your day to day as a founder?
Oh, completely. The main one for me is rugby has the most amazing team spirit, and the sense of togetherness. And there's a quote which we used to say at Saracens, which is the strength of the wolf is the pack, and the strength of the pack is the wolf. And I really believe that when it comes to team building. So we will only get where we want to go together, and if we pull together, but we also individually need to be working as hard as we can. So that's the team aspect is played a huge impact in the way that I see team building. The second one, which actually comes to mind, is the sense of perseverance. So rugby is a horrible sport to play. Like, it's grueling training. The games suck, especially as a forward. Like, you're doing all the dog work. And there's this quote on the gym that used to say, or probably still says, it was about a parable of a stonemason, which is the stonemason can hit the stone 100, 1,000 times, but it's on that final thing that everything breaks. But it wouldn't have broken without all of those hits that came before it. So it's the sense that, like, what you're doing may seem futile, may seem draining and pointless, but it will crack if you're kind of going in the right direction. Same thing with, that's how I played my rugby, and that's kind of how we build our business.
Yeah, well, I think especially when you are building a startup, every day, sometimes it does feel like, where are we going, or are we moving in the right direction? But one thing I've definitely found over the past 3 years is, or at least every year, I look back and see what we've achieved. But when you are in that heads down, it is difficult to see that, and I guess you just need to persevere. And
yeah, I mean, we had that actually this week when we were speaking to a advisor who we hadn't spoken to for about 3 months, and we told him what we were up to, and he said, like, guys, I'm being serious. You are unrecognizable from 3 months ago. And we were like, are we? Like, because we're in it every single day, but having that growth mindset, okay, how different are we from 3 months ago, and can we achieve the same thing in 3 months' time? It's super satisfying to see that.
Yeah, we just need to persevere and
keep on keeping on.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, tech founder, I imagine you use tech products. What's your favorite? It can be hardware, software. What tech products do you love and can't live without?
Great question. Really boring, but the Google Workspace suite. I love Google Slides, Google Docs, and Google Sheets. That's it.
Yeah.
Super boring, but I just love them. We did use Notion as well. Not the biggest fan of that because no one updates it, but yeah. Oh, what am I saying? Slack.
Oh, Slack.
Okay, so definitely Slack. Actually,
Slack.
What's yours?
I really like Superhuman.
I've heard good things about it.
More so because
I've never tried it.
I reached a point where I've always been an inbox zero person, but I reached a point where I couldn't keep up with the influx of emails and
too many inbounds.
Too many inbounds. But it's just a great. I've been told that Gmail also has the reminder functionality, but I just, from a user experience, prefer the Superhuman way of just setting reminders.
You might have to show me that.
Yeah, I can show you in a bit. I've just actually been introduced to Cron, which apparently is the Superhuman equivalent for calendars.
Okay.
But I'm just getting used to that, so I'm not yet convinced or not yet fully on board with how amazing it is yet. But I'm optimistic. But I used to be like you. I used to just love the G Suite, and
I'm a simple woman.
Well, I'm a simple man, but recently we've been sort of introduced to Notion, and I like it because it ultimately every page is a database.
Yeah.
And that being able to have databases that you can embed within databases
Yeah.
can be, it obviously can get quite messy, and it doesn't always make sense. But I definitely feel that we've reached a point where it does make sense.
Yeah, I love Notion. I love Notion personally, but as an org, we're not good enough at keeping it up to date because we have that, and then we have the docs, and we have GitHub, and it just becomes.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother story around how you sort of.
I did try this thing that I loved, but I never renewed my subscription because I thought it was very expensive. Was Motion?
Motion.
It's this like calendar / to-do list thing where it does time boxing. So you, instead of having a to-do list, you say, okay, these are the tasks I have to do, this is how important they are, and this is how long they'll take. And then it schedules them into your calendar, which I really liked, but I thought it was a bit expensive for what it was offering.
Yeah, well, I'll have to take a look.
Yeah.
And that's great. So I'm conscious I've taken a lot of your time already, and it's been great chatting and learning more about Titan and Motion and all sorts of cool things. If you were to give one piece of advice to a new founder or someone who's considering being a founder, what would it be?
Great question. Firstly, ensure that you're crazy enough to do it, because it is, you have to be a little bit of crazy to go down this ride. The second thing I would suggest is really take time validating your market and your problem, and really ensure what you're going after can only be solved by you, and you are the best person to do it. And then the third thing is, once you've kind of decided you're crazy enough and think you have a real opportunity, just keep going. There's just keep on keeping on, have that perseverance. And when things aren't going well, think about how you can change and adapt, whether it's your storytelling, whether it's how you interact with your team, whether it's the product, but keep nimble and keep ambitious and keep persevering.
Yeah, no, I also think, and I don't know if VCs will always agree, but I also think that markets are always bigger than we think. And obviously we might hear about competitors, we might hear about their fundraisers or their achievements, but at the end of the day, it's all noise. And as long as you just persevere, and don't make too many mistakes, or then chances are you will succeed.
Yeah, for sure. I like that about the competitor angle is, you know, Jeff Bezos always says, like, we're customer obsessed, not competitor obsessed.
Yeah.
And that if you really find that product market fit, solve that pain point for someone, you'll be fine.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Meryem, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great having you on the Tech Story, and best of luck growing Titan and conquering the world.
Thank you so much, Charles.